Welcome into the Non-League Papers, Non-League Goalmouth. My name is Matt Badcock. I'm joined by our executive editor, John Couch, and our very special guest today, Tony Incenzo. Welcome on, chaps.
Hi, Matt.
Yeah, good
You all right?
morning. Yeah, all good, chaps.
Good. Just before we get going, I'll do a bit of admin to make sure you like and subscribe our podcast. We've been going a little while now, and we've sort of been getting some great guests on, and none more so than today. And Tony's a legendary broadcaster, a legendary ground hopper around the non-league circuit. It's been to more than 2,600 grounds, I think it is now, Tony, you're up to. It can't be many more. Anyone else who's been to as many games in as weird and as wonderful places as yourself. How did your non-league journey and your love for non-league begin? Talk us through that. It sort of goes back to your childhood, doesn't it?
Yeah, it goes back to the 1970s and the glorious old days of the FA Amateur Cup. And my local non-league club were Hendon Football Club, who were one of the best sides in the country, playing at the famous old Claremont Road ground. And I used to go there. I was only 10 years old. My mum would drop me off at the turnstiles at 10 to 3 with my friend from school, Johnny. And we used to go and watch Hendon play, and we could run around. It was a safe environment for a 10-year-old. Back in the 1970s, there was a lot of hooliganism at football league clubs, and it wouldn't have been safe for two 10-year-olds to go to a big game in London on their own. So dropping us off at Hendon was great, and we used to run up and down the terrace on the far side. And I can remember that on cold days, we used to have a competition between us where we'd try and touch the ball every time it was kicked out of play. And we were running up and down, catching the ball and throwing it back. And it got to, we were keeping the score, and it was 7-7 with about a minute to go in the game. And I saw the ball being kicked over towards the touchline, and I was so exuberant and so excited about trying to win this little contest against Johnny that I stepped under the barrier and walked across to the touchline, and I kicked the ball across the field to John Swannell, the Hendon goalkeeper. And all of a sudden I heard from behind me, "Oi! Get off the pitch!" And I didn't realise I'd actually encroached a yard onto the pitch to kick the ball in my excitement. Now, the referee didn't quite know what to do. He waved play on, and Swannell cleared the ball down the field with a drop kick. So I actually took part in an Isthmian League fixture in 1973, kicking the ball. But that's how I started, really. And there were great days. Hendon had some fantastic players like Rod Hayder, who scored a famous goal up at Newcastle in the FA Cup when Hendon drew 1-1 against top flight Newcastle, brought them back for a replay, which couldn't be staged at Claremont Road. It was played at Watford in midweek, and Hendon lost 4-0. But they were great days. And they just formed my love of non-league football, which has continued for more than 50 years.
So how about the ground hopping? How did all that start?
Well, I started branching out locally. When Hendon weren't playing, I'd go and watch other local teams play, like Edgware Town, like Finchley, the old Finchley Football Club, Kingsbury Town, and so on. And then I started going to some of the Hendon away games. They run a supporters club coach, and I'd go to away games which seemed miles away at places like Enfield and Staines-Town and Slough Town and so on. And after that, I wrote to the London Football Association asking for details of all the London non-league clubs, and they sent me a handbook. And in those days, there were about 60 non-league clubs in London. So I set about visiting those clubs. Obviously, I was 13, 14 years old by this stage. I didn't drive or anything. So there were long old trips down to places like Tooting and Mitcham and Dulwich Hamlet on the tube. Mystical places as well, like Royal Arsenal Sports and Recreation Association, who played at Plumstead in the London Spartan League. Fisher Athletic played at Mitcham. I remember going to see Fisher play in the Spartan League. And the paying attendance was just 3 people. I paid 20p to get in. I asked the gateman at half time, what's the official attendance? He said, well, I've only taken 60p. So the attendance was 3. And in the second half, 3 players were sent off who stood along the touchline. So the crowd had doubled by the end of the game. And it finished in a 2-2 draw. So there were more goals than paying spectators. So these were incredible experiences when I was still at school.
Did you find that you were kind of going and watching these games and not really thinking, oh, I love non-league football? It's just you thought this is football, and you're just going out and enjoying being part of it, like you say, literally in some cases at Hendon, being part of the match?
Yeah, I mean, in those days, I didn't quite appreciate it. And some of the old Isthmian grounds were absolutely fantastic. Hendon being the one I loved most, with terrific terracing around 3 sides and an old wooden stand. But the old Enfield Football Club at Southbury Road, big terracing, and then massive grounds. The old Dulwich Hamlet at Champion Hill could hold up to 30,000. Tooting's ground, the original Tooting ground, could hold 15,000, and so on. And I didn't quite appreciate how good those grounds were. They were built up after the Second World War, when the people returned to work and were rebuilding the economy, and people got involved with their local non-league clubs, and the players would come in the summer and create a terrace platform, or would build a stand and so on. And they got massive crowds in those post-war periods. Dulwich Hamlet would get well over 10,000. And so they had to build big terraces. And as the crowds dropped away in the later post-war years, those grounds were a memory of how good things were. And as I said, I went to all these grounds. They were excellent. Even at Finchley, one of my local clubs, big terracing and a listed grandstand, which still exists. But I didn't, as a youngster, quite appreciate it as much as I do now. And I miss those old grounds.
Yeah, obviously your love for football started at Queen's Park Rangers. So how did you and how do you still juggle between the two? And obviously you've been to, is it like 20 years worth of Queen's Park Rangers games, and yet you still get to see all these non-league grounds as well?
Well, when the fixtures come out for QPR at the start of the season, I write them all in my diary, and I know where I'm going to be for the next 10 months. I've been to every QPR home game since 1973, so it's 52 and a half years now. And I just wouldn't, if someone stood outside the turnstile at QPR with £1 million in their hand and said, "Here, mate, you take that, but you're not going in today," I wouldn't take it. I prefer to watch QPR against Scunthorpe in the League Cup, for example, in the old days when Scunthorpe were in the Football League, rather than going to a big game in Arsenal against Tottenham in London. QPR is always my first love, but they only play 23 home games a season, so I've got maybe 23, 24, 25 other dates plus midweek dates to go and watch non-league, and I aim to visit 50 to 60 new non-league grounds a season, and it keeps me busy. And the clubs I've got left to visit are all spread across the country, places like Torrington in Devon, Elburton Villa in Devon, AFC Newbiggin, newcomers in the Northern League. I've got AFC Blackpool, so I've got a lot of travelling to do, but it's great fun. And what I love about going to non-league games is the volunteers. I turn up, try to get to each ground 2 hours before the kick-off so I can make sure I get a programme. And I turn up 2 hours before the game, and the volunteers are already in place. They're marking the pitch out, or they're putting the goal nets up, or they're getting the teas and coffees ready. And non-league football thrives on the energy and the vision of those volunteers who keep everything going on an unpaid basis, and they're doing it for the love of the game. And that's the beauty of non-league, really. It's not about the money and the glory. It's all about being involved and supporting and being involved at your local club. Yeah.
So how many grounds is it now that you've been to?
I think it's 2,658. And my most recent trip was to Shirehampton in the Western League on Saturday. Really interesting story, because they had to move away from their traditional home ground to get promoted to the Western League 3 or 4 years ago. And in that time, they didn't rest on their laurels. Some clubs go and ground share, and they ground share for 15, 20 years, and they're quite happy to do that. But Shirehampton were desperate to get back playing in their old village, so they spent nearly £200,000 on building up the facilities, installing floodlights, installing a stand, and hard standing around the pitch and so on. And the most interesting aspect of the story is that there was a preservation order on a number of trees overlooking the pitch around the touchline, so the club had to avoid disturbing the roots of those trees to lay concrete and so on. And it was a really complex procedure, but it was all achieved by the club's volunteers, who went in during their spare time and laid the concrete and erected the stands and so on, and got involved with the floodlights. So a fascinating story, which I hope to relay soon in the non-league paper.
Well, Tony, you obviously, I think you got married quite recently with young children as well. Your missus must be an absolute dream to. I mean, every time I go to football, I'm sort of expecting again, But you go to so many games. To have that support must be helped to you as well.
Well, my wife is Italian, so the Italian ladies have a different viewpoint on football, because if you go to a big match in Milan or Rome, you'll see hundreds of women, thousands of women watching the game and sitting in large groups, and it's a different culture. It's a way of life for Italian people, and that's good. But what I do as well, I have an incentive scheme for my wife. It's like a club card for a supermarket. So every time she accompanies me to a match, we've got a giant poster, big map of the United Kingdom on the wall upstairs. And every time she goes to a game with me, she gets a green sticker on the map. And all of a sudden, she's got 300 or 400 stickers all across the map. Wow. And her father came along one time, and he couldn't believe how many non-league games she'd been to. But we also try and combine it as well, to incorporate a visit to maybe a tourist attraction. So when we went to a non-league game in Leicester, for example, we went to the National Space Station, which we really enjoyed. And now that we've got a young daughter, 6 years old, we try to incorporate interesting things for her as well. We went to a couple of games in Blackpool over the bank holiday, and so we visited Madame Tussauds in Blackpool, and we went up to the top of the Blackpool Tower and along the beach where my daughter enjoyed a donkey ride and so on. And down in Devon, when we went recently, I saw 3 games down in Devon and Cornwall as well recently. The family attended with me, and we went to see Creeley Park, where Sooty lives. So my daughter was fascinated to meet the real Sooty and shake his hand and have a photograph taken. So I try to make it enjoyable for the whole family, but obviously the main part of it is for me to get to the football matches.
Is that the beauty of it as well? You know, you say you go to all these different places. You know, you're not just going to football grounds; you're going to different communities, aren't you? And seeing all these. You know, I think probably people sometimes forget how many football clubs and grounds there are in this country and communities. You know, you've got little towns that have kind of got often more than one team, and it's just amazing how sort of far out the roots kind of the game go, really.
Yeah, you make a really good point, because a football club puts the town or the village on the map. And I visit places that I wouldn't otherwise have heard of if it wasn't for the football team. So as I said, the recent visit to Shirehampton, it's only a small village, a small population. I wouldn't have heard of Shirehampton. I wouldn't have visited Shirehampton if it wasn't for football. As you said, some very small places like Great Torrington have 2 teams. I went to Torridge side recently who play in Great Torrington. I've still got to visit Torrington Football Club. So you go all around the country, little places and fascinating places as well. You know, Redcar is a small town. It's got 2 football teams. It's got a lovely seafront. I enjoyed visiting there and reported that for the non-league paper. And it's just an adventure. It's not just about the football. And when I was younger and I didn't drive and I went everywhere on public transport, yes, it was just about the football. I'd go to these matches. I'd arrive on the tube or by train. I had to go straight to the ground, watch the game and come straight home. You didn't see anything of the town. But as you get older and you become more interested in general aspects of life, it is important to take in the surroundings of the local town when you attend a football match.
What's your favourite place to visit, Tony? I mean, obviously, plenty of groundhoppers around. Anywhere you can you can recommend for them?
One of the most outstanding trips was on a Northern League groundhopping weekend, and it was a team called Stanley United, who actually play up at the top of a very steep hill on a plateau, and they had a little house on the halfway line. It was an actual house, and downstairs was a tea hut, and the players, downstairs was a dressing room area for both teams, and upstairs was the tea hut and a real log fire burning to keep everybody warm. And it was amazing. I think the ground is derelict now, but when we arrived, it was a groundhopper weekend, so 200 or 300 groundhoppers turned up, a couple of coaches and a fleet of cars in a sort of wacky racist style procession. And when we turned up and parked to walk up to the hill to the top to the football ground, everybody came out of their little mining houses to have a look. I couldn't believe that everybody was arriving. It was like an occasion for the village as well. So football puts as I said, puts towns on the map and puts people in places they would never visit. And football is a great universal language. I like traveling around as well. I meet people for the first time, but you feel as if you've known them for 20, 30 years, because you immediately get talking the same language of football. I know Matt's dad very well from the language of football when he was on the Isthmian League and on the Eastern Counties League before that, a great guy. And every time I met him, it was like 2 old friends meeting up, because you just talk about things that you were both interested in. And it was almost like talking to a foreign language to somebody who didn't understand what we were talking about. So, yeah, football is a great friendship community, particularly the non-league family.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? You say you speak to people that you would, meet people that you would have no other reason to paths to cross, would you really? That's kind of the beauty. That's what I like about our job is, we get to speak to somebody in the northwest in the morning, and then in the afternoon it might be someone in the southwest or the east or London or all over. We speak to people from all over the country, and it's kind of it's a funny thing, isn't it? At 3 o'clock on a Saturday or even 7:45 on a Tuesday, you got all these people stood round at non-league pitches watching a great game of football, and that's kind of the beauty of it, I guess, for everybody.
Absolutely. And those people are delighted that you have phoned them up, because they take such pride in their local club. And there's always something going on at non-league level. There's always a new stand going in or a fundraising initiative. And I think that is the beauty of non-league football. I mean, in the Football League, as a QPR supporter, I'm not really interested in what's going on at other clubs in the Championship, unless they make a major signing. But I'm not interested. I'm just interested in QPR. Most QPR fans would say the same. But at non-league level, everybody at non-league level is interested in what is going on around all the other clubs. They might have a specific fundraising activity that's unique that other clubs can copy and buy into and embrace and get on board with. They might share ideas on how to obtain funding from the Football Foundation and so on. And that's the beauty of the non-league paper, because you cover a spectrum of stories across the country which are interesting to everybody who follows non-league football. And our non-league family embraces everything from the north to the south. We saw that match at the weekend between Carlisle and Truro, which was a 900-mile round trip. That created a lot of interest, even though I think Truro's visit to Gateshead will be even further. But people are interested in those quirky stories that you put on page 3 of the non-league paper, the human interest stories. It's just a fascinating aspect of non-league football. The tea lady who's been involved for 60 years, the groundsman who does it in his spare time in the wind and the rain and goes out and marks the pitch on Christmas Day ahead of the Boxing Day fixtures. It's all part of the non-league family and the adventure of being involved in non-league football.
Tell me, Tony, just quickly, what does a week of Tony Incenzo look like? I mean, obviously, if you've got a free Saturday, what do you do? Do you just sort of look through the fixtures and pick by hand, or is there a system? Is there like you mentioned, your map? Do you sort of go to sort of various points of the map at once? How does it all work as to sort of where you go?
Yeah, I give preference to the National Cup competition. So, I work for Isuzu as their roaming reporter. They call it the roaming reporter. I go out and visit games in each round of the national competitions. And I have a look down the list. I've had a look down the list for the Emirates FA Cup, the current round coming up, and I've been to all of those grounds. So I'm now looking at forthcoming games in the Isuzu FA Vars in particular. And that is my favourite competition, the Isuzu FA Vars, because anybody who enters the competition can win it. You just need a bit of luck along the way with getting home draws, with the weather. It could be a really wet or windy day away from home and it's going to be tricky. But the Isuzu FA Vars, every year we see new winners. And last season, of course, Whitstable edged Whiteleaf. Whiteleaf have now been promoted, so they can't enter it. So Whitstable are back in. They're exempt into, I think, the second round this year, and they could be amongst the favourites. But anybody could come along and knock them out. And we've seen Whiteleaf go into the Isuzu FA Trophy this year and already been knocked out by Southall on penalties. So it's really interesting following these national competitions. But the Vars, for many, many years, it was dominated by the Northern League clubs. And the reason for that was because Northern League clubs weren't going forward for promotion. They'd maybe win the Vars or win the Northern League, and they'd stay in the Northern League because they said there was too much travelling to go into the Northern Premier League. But then we've seen the restructuring of non-league football, and the Northern Premier League has a division now which embraces the northeast of England, and many of the Northern League clubs have now gone forward for promotion. In fact, they have to. The rules are that if you win promotion, you have to go forward. Otherwise, you'll be demoted down a division. So everybody wants to go forward, and many of those Northern League clubs have gone up to the Northern Premier League, and they've done very well and they've progressed, and they now enter the FA Trophy. So it means they can't pot hunt. I would have called it pot hunting in the FA Vars in past years, where teams like Whitley Bay won it 3 times and so on. That can't happen anymore. So it opens up the Isuzu FA Vars to new winners every single year, and it's really, really exciting. And I just can't wait. I'm always waiting for the cup draws to see who's at home and what clubs I can visit, and that's the way I plan my fixtures.
Yeah, it's such a unique competition, isn't it? Especially when you get to the later stages and it becomes sort of national, and you've got clubs that would never ever cross paths for any other reason, and they're there. And obviously you're at Wembley every year, and you see that sort of joy, particularly on the Vars for the Vars final, on the players' faces, but the families and the supporters. It's such a unique competition, isn't it?
Absolutely. And non-league finals day is the highlight of our season. And it all came about because of the non-league paper, because I wrote an article for the non-league paper about 7 years ago, I think it was. And I was thinking that the FA Trophy final and the FA Vars final were on different weekends or on different days. And the crowds for the Vase final in particular were starting to fall away. I think there was only 6,000 or 7,000 one time. And I just thought, it's not going to be viable for this to continue at Wembley Stadium. It's not going to even break even. They've got to, just to open the gates at Wembley, must cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I put forward this idea in the non-league paper for what I called at the time a non-league jamboree. Let's get the two non-league finals, the two national finals on the same day, a lunchtime kickoff and a late afternoon kickoff. Have it on a Sunday in May, towards the end of May, when there's not much else on football-wise, so that all the media can focus on it. And also invite along the whole non-league family from around the country to boost the attendance. And there is a neutral area at the non-league finals day. I'd like to go further. I'd like every club who participates in the Isuzu FA Trophy and the Isuzu FA Vase to run a coach full of supporters to non-league finals day. I think it's very, very cheap. If you book a party ticket for non-league finals day, I think it's only about £15. So it's very, very cheap. Now, some clubs in the Vase might say, well, we haven't got 50 people. Well, I think you do, because you've got youth teams, you've got community sides, ladies' sides, you've got all the family, wives and girlfriends of the players and the players themselves. So it should be easy. Once a year, we're only asking once a year for clubs to run a coach to Wembley. And if we could get all of the hundreds and hundreds of clubs that participate in the FA Vase and the FA Trophy to run a coach, then we'd almost fill Wembley Stadium for non-league finals day, and it'd be a huge event. It would be like the FA Amateur Cup. The FA Amateur Cup back in the 1950s would attract 100,000 to Wembley every year, and there were mythical teams like Pegasus, who were a combination of old boys from Cambridge and Oxford University. You had teams like Bishop Auckland getting to Wembley. You had Willington. You had a lot of Northern League sides in the 1950s, and there would always be huge crowds. And it'd be nice to see that come back for non-league finals day. But it needs participation from all the clubs that enter the Vase and the Trophy to do that.
Have a big competition this weekend, the FA Cup. Obviously, that needs no introduction. But you must have been to many FA Cup tie over the years. What's your FA Cup memories, either as a child growing up or as a roving reporter now?
Well, in the 1970s, when I was growing up, the FA Cup was the be-all and end-all of football. I mean, the FA Cup final itself was a national event, live on BBC One and live on ITV, and the build-up started from really early in the morning, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. So you'd sit down and you'd sit in front of the TV all day. You'd see the players having their breakfast at the team hotel. You'd see interviews with the players' wives. You'd see the teams going to Wembley on their team buses with a helicopter overhead. And then you'd see the players arriving at Wembley and so on. And you'd sit there from 9 o'clock in the morning. You could buy the match programme in your local newsagents a few days before. So you'd buy the match programme and sit there and read that. And then afterwards, when the FA Cup final finished, you'd go out in your back garden and you'd try and, with your little brother or whatever, or your friends coming around, and you'd try and recreate the winning goal out in your back garden yourself. So the FA Cup in those days was the be-all and end-all. And the non-league clubs were a huge part of that, because non-league clubs in those days, I remember interviewing Mark Warburton, the current, he's been a manager at QPR and so on. I interviewed him for the non-league paper about when he played for Enfield, and Enfield drew against Barnsley in the FA Cup and took them back to a replay, which couldn't be played at the old Southbury Road ground. It was played at White Hart Lane at Tottenham's ground, and they had 35,000 there, and that showed the interest. And he said that in those days, the non-league clubs could almost match the top professional sides, because the non-league players had good jobs and they got maybe a good little salary playing non-league football as well. And the differentiation between playing at non-league and playing at top flight level was very small in those days. So he told me about an Enfield player who played in that cup run, who was offered a contract to sign for Spurs, but he turned down the move to Spurs because he was actually earning more money in his day job, which I think was for British Telecom, and his match appearance fees for Enfield. Now, of course, a Premier League player would be on 80 to 100 grand a week. But in those days, a Premier League player might have only been on £400 or £500 a week. It was the old Division 1 then. So it wasn't worth the non-league players stepping away from their day jobs. So they continued at non-league level. And in those days, they were tremendous. I mean, I remember watching the Hereford-Newcastle game on Match of the Day in the early 70s. I think it was 71, 72. And Hereford went up to Newcastle. Hereford were a Southern League side. They went up to Newcastle and drew 2-2, and they took Newcastle back to Edgar Street and beat them 2-1 on Match of the Day. And the Ronnie Radford goal is still shown every year. every year on Match of the Day, where he hammers it into the top corner from 35 yards. And all these kids run onto the pitch with their Parker coats all done up and the hoods up and running on the muddy pitch when that goal went in. And people always forget the winning goal was by Ricky George. Ricky George, I know him very well. And he never gets the credit for scoring the winning goal against Newcastle for Hereford, because people always remember the Ronnie Radford goal. But there were always tremendous efforts by the non-league clubs in those days. I can remember Altrincham winning at top flight Birmingham City. Wimbledon were great giant killers. They won at top flight Burnley. And I can remember Wimbledon going up to Leeds and drawing 0-0 against Leeds, who were the best team in Europe at that time. And Peter Lorimer, the hot shot Peter Lorimer, he had the strongest, hardest shot in football. Leeds won a penalty. He took the penalty against Dickie Guy, the Wimbledon goalkeeper. Dickie Guy dived down to save it. And then they brought Leeds back to a replay in South London. They had to play it at Selhurst Park. Leeds eventually edged through. But the non-league clubs in the 1970s and the giant killing was tremendous. And even going back to the late 1940s, when Yeovil on their famous sloping pitch beat Sunderland 2-1, and Sunderland were top flight. Great days. And it hasn't quite got the same glamour now, but the FA Cup is still magnificent for non-league clubs, because those teams get through. You've got Jersey Bulls in the FA Cup. If they got through to the first round or even to the third round of the FA Cup, and a Premier League club had to fly over to Jersey for an FA Cup tie, it would be absolutely incredible. The publicity would shine across the whole country. The only thing I don't like about all the publicity at a national level for the FA Cup is that all of a sudden our non-league players become plumbers and carpenters and candlestick makers.
100%.
Yeah, that's
it just doesn't. If you read a report in the non-league paper just on an Isthmian League game at the weekend, and it was full of the professions of the non-league paper, the non-league players, it just wouldn't make sense. And I've said to people say, "Oh, it's the glamour of the FA Cup." I said, "Go pick a non-league game this weekend. Pick any non-league game and go along. And first of all, insist that you ask the club secretary for all the professions of the players. This is for a run-of-the-mill non-league game. Insist that you want all the players' professions, and the secretary wouldn't tell you, and he'd laugh at you. And then when the game is in progress, just start shouting out various professions: plumber, carpenter, postman delivers. The postman delivers. They say that every year. And watch the reaction of the spectators around you at a non-league game, or the players on the pitch themselves, who start looking over at you as if you're insane. But all of a sudden, when it gets to the first round of the FA Cup, it seems to be acceptable. And I just think it's ridiculous. Respect these footballers. They are footballers. They're playing in the first round of the FA Cup. It's a big occasion for them, and you don't need to refer to their professions, unless, of course, somebody has got a very unusual profession, or they've done something valiant, like a fireman rescued people in the Grenfell Tower fire. Yes, certainly, I think then that's worth a mention. But just the run-of-the-mill newsagent or carpenter, it's irrelevant to the game of football. And when I go to watch a non-league game at the weekend, I don't think at all about their professions. I'm just watching the football.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you something very quickly about something you mentioned earlier about programs. I know that's another topic that we agree on. A match day program is a very big part of a groundhopper's experience, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's part of any football fan's experience, because if you look at the front cover of a match program and you see the dates and the opposition, it immediately sparks a flood of memories coming back. You remember who you went to at that game. I went to games when I was a kid with my late uncle, and I would start having memories of my uncle. And my uncle used to like a drink before going to games, and his behaviour was quite loud at certain games. We went to a match once in Dublin. My uncle was Irish, and I've still got the programme from this game. It was a match between Home Farm and TEK United. So TEK United were an Irish non-league side, but they were formed. TEK is the National Milk Marketing Board. So my uncle, and I look at this programme cover now, and I still remember my uncle shouting things about milkmen all through the game. He goes, "Oh, the milkman's got the ball! The milkman's got the ball!" And people were looking around. He'd had a few drinks before the game in Dublin. My uncle was Irish, but a great guy. Used to take me to all these different games. And you look at the front cover. I've got that Newcastle Hendon FA Cup programme. Absolutely tremendous. I look at the cover and I remember the Rod Hayder goal. and so on. I look at all sorts of programs from defunct clubs. Like I went to a lot of games at Finchley Football Club, one of my other local clubs, when I was young, and they merged with Wingate to become Wingate and Finchley. The old Kingsbury Town, I've got programs from there that just spark memories. And people used to, when I was a kid, there used to be program shops at all the non-league grounds. So at Hendon, the program shop was a little hut inside the gate, and people used to congregate around the program hut, swapping programs and buying programs. And I've still got all the programs I bought when I was a kid. And you'd look at a program then from a faraway club like Blythe Spartans, who are another great FA Cup giant killer, by the way. And you'd look at that and it would spark an interest in that club, and you'd read where they played and what sort of attendances they got. And programs are an amazing form of memorabilia, but they're starting to drift away. And the reason for that is because everybody under the age of 30 has grown up with smartphones and mobile phones, and all the information that they need is on their mobile phone. So the original purpose of a football program was to provide the teams and the league table and the fixtures. You can get all that on a smartphone now. So people don't buy programs as much as they used to. And a lot of non-league clubs are going online. But I still love that physical program. And I think the way forward for programs to survive, you've got to have a really eye-catching cover, maybe a retro cover, so that people walking into the ground see that and they want to buy a copy. And also you have to include content which is not available anywhere online. So I went to see Hendon play a year or two ago in the Isuzu FA Trophy for some filming we were doing. And the match program was amazing. There was so much historical content, so much stuff in there about the background and the fabric of Hendon Football Club that you couldn't glean online. So Hendon know what it takes, and a lot of other non-league clubs are surviving and still selling programs. And another excuse that's trotted out is it's too expensive, but there are program companies that provide a very good service where programs are cost effective. There's a company called Barnes Print in East Anglia who provide clubs with programs free of charge, and they sell all the advertising themselves and they make their money that way. So there are ways forward for non-league football. And I think, yes, I understand why clubs are going online, and I understand why young people don't buy them anymore. But for older people, they are very much a collectible and a great form of memories.
I think I might know the answer to this, but tell us about the weirdest game you've been to.
Well, I've been to a lot of weird games. I mean, the worst game I ever saw, it wasn't a non-league game, it was in Belgium. I saw Standard Liège play Mechelen. And Mechelen, it was a 0-0 draw. It's the worst game I've ever seen, because Mechelen, their players were running offside deliberately, 20, 30 yards offside. So the ball was booted forward, 30 yards offside. The assistant referee's flag would go up. It was a linesman in those days. And then the Mechelen player who'd run forward to perhaps the opposition 6-yard box would then pick the ball up and walk back very slowly towards the halfway line, wasting a good 30, 40 seconds. And then they'd regain possession. A player would run forward 40, 50 yards offside, boot it down towards him, flag goes up, he'd pick the ball up and walk back very slowly offside. So it was just a bore draw. And the team got their 0-0 draw by a tactic I've never seen before or since. And that's perhaps the most bizarre game I've ever seen. But I've seen some great non-league games. I remember going to see Yeovil against Enfield in the FA Trophy in the mid-1980s on the old sloping pitch at Yeovil, where Yeovil scored 2 free kicks from in their own half. It was very windy, and they scored 2 70-yard free kicks. That was amazing. There are just so many memories. I saw a game in Peterborough, a non-league game, where it was 1-1. I think it was a cup game, 1-1 in the last minute. So the opposition goalkeeper, the opposition win a corner, the goalkeeper goes up for the corner. The corner's flighted in. He challenges the home goalkeeper. They end up in a heap on the floor and they start punching each other. I won't say who the two teams were. They started punching each other, 2 goalkeepers, and the 2 goalkeepers were sent off, red carded. Never seen anything like it. Both teams down to 10 men. The 2 goalkeepers sent off for fighting each other. You couldn't make it up, because goalkeepers are normally 100 yards apart on the pitch. The 2 of them were sent off. So amazing non-league memories all around the country.
Yeah. And what about the game inside a prison as well? That's a unique one.
I should mention that. There was a team called Phoenix, and there was a league called the London Airport Midweek League, which doesn't exist anymore. This was in 2011. And the London Airport Midweek League was mainly consisting of teams that were players who were on shift work in London Airport. So there were teams like Terminal 1, there were teams like Baggage Handler, and then there were guest teams like police teams who were on shift work, and there was a post office team as well. So there was also this prison team called Phoenix, who were young offenders at Feltham Prison. And the prison, this was just after the London riots in 2010 and 2011. So the prison was full of young people who were all good footballers. So they formed a team. And obviously they had to play all the games at home because they were not allowed out. So the away teams had to come in to visit them. So I got special permission from the prison to go in. They said, you can't take any phones in. You can't take any pen or paper. You just have to come in and watch the game. So I had to meet up an hour before the kickoff. It was a visitor centre just outside the prison. Had to meet up with the away team, which was Hanworth Villa veterans, and the referee. So and I met up with them, and then two big burly prison guards came to meet us and escorted us through. And it took nearly an hour to get into the prison because it was like airport-style security. You were searched to make sure you hadn't brought a phone. You had to go through body scanners like in an airport. One big door would slam behind you. You were locked in another room contained there. Then you went through to another room. And then finally, it was a pathway that led out to the football pitch. And there were some changing rooms for the players and the referee. And the football pitch was surrounded by high wire mesh fencing with barbed wire on the top, about 10-foot high fencing, and two dugouts as well. And I was the only spectator, so it was the fabled attendance of one. You're the only person at the game. I sat in the dugout because it was raining, and I watched this game, and it was really entertaining. Phoenix, they were all good young players. They had a couple of prison guards sitting in as the centre backs, who were big muscular centre backs. But the young footballers ran rings around Hanworth Villa veterans and won by 2-1. And there were no problems at all from the Phoenix players with the referee, because they saw it as a privilege and a pleasure to play football in the prison. And the only sort of dissent was coming from the Hanworth Villa players. One of them almost got sent off by the referee, but he said, well, you've made the effort to come into the prison, so I'm not going to send you off, but can you tone it down? Then on the way out, we were walking back towards the changing room block, and all the prisoners started coming out to taunt the Hanworth Villa players. Oh, you lost 2-1, you're rubbish, you lost 2-1. And one of the Hanworth Villa players turned around and said, we might have lost 2-1, but we're going home now, and you're not. And, you know, we had to be
brave,
hurried out very quickly,
brave,
in case anything kicked off. But yeah, that was an amazing experience, and amazing to go inside a prison for 2 or 3 hours and see what goes on in there.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I've played at Broadmoor a few times, both football and cricket, and when you said it literally took about an hour to get in, you know, one door closed, big door then unopened, and then when we got it, just a surreal atmosphere. The big wall surrounding us, and prison guards keeping an eye on every move that they made, and a little bit scary at times. You mentioned about the banter. We were too scared to be getting involved in any of that. We shook their hands, and then we left pretty sharpish. But amazing experience, really was.
Yeah, I did another one.
And it was scary.
Yeah, I did another one before the lockdowns. Hackney Wick, who are an established non-league club, were going into prisons and playing sort of exhibition games, and they invited me along for one of their games. It was down in Epsom or Banstead in Surrey, and again a lot of security to get in. But what they were doing was not just playing a football match, but they were holding workshops for the prisoners. Really good. One of the top-ranking officials from Hackney Wick had been in prison himself earlier in his life, and he totally rebuilt his life and got involved with the football club and coaching and community work for the football club. And he went in, and all the prisoners assembled in the gym, and he gave a sort of stream of consciousness speech to the prisoners about, he said, I've been where you guys have been. I committed crimes. I served my time. I've turned my life around. This is how I've done it. I've done it through football. And he got he spoke non-stop for 20 minutes without any notes. And he got a standing ovation from the prisoners. And then they went outside and played a football match against the prison team. And it was amazing. And I think Hackney Wick has stopped doing that now because it all stopped because of the COVID and everything else. But that was another amazing experience. And it just shows how football can embrace every aspect of life, from families to club volunteers to people in prison. It's a universal language.
Yeah, like you say, like it can be life changing for so many, such a powerful thing, isn't it? Football, and you see that impact, and kind of brings us on to some of the players you've seen at QPR who've been ex non-league players. They've had their lives sort of transformed by sort of being seen in non-league and then getting their moves into the football league, and often go to the very top. And I know you've interviewed many for us as well. Richard Coney, obviously, in last Sunday's paper, and Charlie Austin in the past, and people like that who've started in non-league and then gone on to have these amazing careers. Or Richard Coney's obviously in the middle of that now. Yeah,
I mean, the interview with Richard Coney was particularly interesting because he first came to light playing in the Homeless World Cup, and then he settled in the UK on a visitor's visa, and he started playing non-league football for Athletic Newman. And only 18 months ago, he was still playing in the Essex Senior League as a part-time footballer. He couldn't work because of visa problems, but as soon as his visa was sorted out, he was signed by Wycombe Wanderers, scored a hatful of goals, and then joined QPR at the start of the season for £2.75 million reportedly. And an amazing story. He could power QPR to the Premier League because people are already drawing comparisons with Les Ferdinand, who is another ex-non-league player who went all the way to the top of QPR and played for England. Started off, he played in the FA Vase final as a teenager for Yeading, moved to Hayes, was working as a van driver, delivering parcels when QPR signed him, ended up as a multi-millionaire because of a £6 million move to Newcastle, and so on. Also played for Bolton, I think, in the top flight. Amazing story. There were other non-league players who progressed at QPR. Andrew Impey started at Yeading, came to QPR as a very young man, had to bide his time in the reserve team, got into the first team, still involved at the club now as a coach. He must be in his early 50s. Just amazing stories. It just shows the gems of what exists at non-league level, the rough diamonds that can be polished and with full-time training and so on at a championship club or a Premier League club can become star players. But I think there are less and less now. I've been told, the interview with Mark Warburton, he told me there are less and less players like that now at non-league level because he said that all the young talent now gets hoovered up by Premier League and Championship and Football League clubs' academies. So all these players are at academy level from when they're very young. But there are still those coming through from non-league, and the race to find the next Jamie Vardy, who starts off at Stocksbridge Park Steel and goes on to become a star player in the Premier League at Leicester and play for England. That there are still scouts out at non-league games all the time, looking for those rough diamonds, those gems, to bring them through. And it's particularly important for clubs in League One and League Two who haven't got transfer budgets, haven't got big budgets. They need to find players at non-league level, and they need to be out scouting all levels of the non-league pyramid. I mean, I think the players at National League level are probably on wages that compare to League Two anyway, so they're in no hurry to move on. But if you can find a player playing at step 3 or step 4 or step 5 or step 6, they'll be hungry to make that big step up.
Yeah, they're out there
professionally.
Yeah, definitely. What would you kind of wrap up soon, because you've given us a lot of your time and really appreciate it. But what would you kind of say to people who haven't been to non-league, and what would you sort of encourage them to do to go and get that sort of first taste of it? What do you think they should expect?
Well, there are 3 incredible aspects of non-league. There's the accessibility, there's the affordability, and there's the community aspect. So accessibility, it's your local club. If you want to get a ticket for a Premier League game, you have to book it months in advance. It's impossible. All these Premier League games are sold out. But your local non-league club, particularly at step 5 or step 6, you can turn up 10 minutes before the kickoff. You can park outside. You can pay your money, cash on the turnstile. You can stroll in, stand where you want, talk to anybody you want, stroll around the ground without stewards telling you can't stand here, you can't go there. And then after the game, which you'll enjoy because it's a good standard of football, you can go in the bar afterwards and have a drink and mix and rub shoulders with the players. The players are all in the bar after the game. The referee's probably in there. And you can chat to the players about the game you've just watched. So it's that accessibility is a real drawing point. And then I move on to affordability. So affordability, if you want to get a ticket for a Premier League game in London, it might cost you £100. If you've got a couple of kids and they want a replica shirt. And they obviously, you're out all day, you've got to get something to eat at the match. A burger is going to cost you £6 or £7. A drink's going to cost you £4 or £5. You know, it's not going to be affordable for working class people to go to Premier League football. I grew up in a working class family, a one parent family on a council estate. And when we used to go to football, when I was a kid and my uncle used to take me or my mum used to take me, it was seen as a luxury. It was relatively expensive, but it wasn't out of the average working class person's pocket. But it is now. And if I was growing up now in a one parent family in a council estate, I wouldn't be able to go to football, but I would be able to go and watch local non-league football. So the affordability, if you go to a step 5 or a step 6 game, a match in the Isuzu FA Vase, it's maybe £5, maybe £6 to get in. You can get a burger and a drink for a couple of quid each. You can get a program for £1. You're going to have change from £12, you know, and kids can, a lot of these non-league games, it's very cheap for the kids to get in, or it's free for the kids to get in if they're accompanied by an adult. So that's very, very good. And, you know, even higher up, steps 3 and 4, you're going to have change maybe from 20 quid for your day out. And that is a big drawing point, the affordability. And then there's the community aspect, where all non-league clubs run community teams, youth teams. They run, maybe some non-league clubs run 20, 30 youth teams for girls and boys from 5 years upwards, women's teams, disability teams. And that has a massive stretch out into the local area. And that, again, is a great aspect of non-league football, the community reach and the community involvement. So those are the 3 things that I would point out to anybody who's thinking of going to their first ever non-league game: you know, the affordability, the accessibility, and the community aspect. And you will invariably enjoy it, and you'll be hungry for more. And there are more and more people that I meet around the country who are former Premier League fans who are now watching non-league football on a regular basis because they either can't afford to get in, they can't get tickets, or they like the fact that non-league football reaches out into the local community. So those for me are the selling points.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. You can, of course, read Tony in the non-league paper and his travels around all over the country. Obviously, regular columnists, his interviews as well, which are brilliant. And we love reading about all the wonderful places that you've been to and the people. I think that particularly shines through in the pieces you do for Estonia, the people that you meet and kind of what this game means to them. So make sure you're picking up the paper in the shop on Sundays and also subscribing online as well. Like and subscribe to this Non-League Goalmouth show as well. We really appreciate your time, Tony. Thanks very much for joining us. It's a fascinating insight into non-league and your history and how long you've been watching, and many more grounds to visit as well, I'm sure. But thanks very much for your time.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
and keep up the good work, chaps, on the non-league paper, because to keep all that going, particularly through the COVID years and the lockdowns, was an incredible achievement. You kept everybody informed about non-league football, even when there wasn't any football to watch, but there were things going on behind the scenes that we needed to know about. So that's incredible. And long may the non-league paper continue.
We appreciate that, Tony.
Certainly aged us a few years, but that way, COVID days.
I was say, Cat's only 32.
Yeah. I feel 82.
But no, we really appreciate you joining us. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Like I say, like and subscribe to our channel, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.